Nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, the Stanley Hotel loomed like a grand old specter above the town of Estes Park, Colorado. Built in 1909, its imposing white facade and red roof had witnessed over a century of history, drawing guests from all walks of life. But it wasn't just the hotel's beauty and history that attracted visitors. It was the tales of hauntings, the whispers of ghosts roaming its halls, that beckoned the brave and curious. Among those drawn to the Stanley Hotel's eerie allure was Emily Johnson, a young woman with a keen interest in the paranormal. She had read about the hotel's haunted reputation and couldn't resist the urge to experience it herself. With her backpack filled with ghost hunting equipment, Emily checked into the hotel one chilly autumn afternoon, ready to uncover its secrets. Emily's room was on the 4th floor, said to be the most haunted. She felt a chill as she entered, the air thick with an unspoken history. The room was quaint, with antique furnishings and an old-fashioned charm, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. As night fell, Emily unpacked her equipment, an EMF detector, a digital voice recorder, and a thermal camera. She planned to explore the hotel's most infamous spots, starting with the concert hall. Legend had it that Flora Stanley, the hotel's co-founder, still played the piano there on quiet nights. Emily made her way to the concert hall, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The air grew colder as she approached, and she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She reached the hall, a grand room with a dusty piano standing in the center. She turned on her EMF detector and swept the room. The device beeped sporadically, indicating the presence of electromagnetic fields. "Is anyone here?" Emily called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Flora Stanley, are you with us?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then faintly, the sound of a piano key being pressed echoed through the room. Emily's heart raced. She lifted her thermal camera, scanning the room for any signs of a presence. Into the cold blue of the camera's display, she saw a faint, human-shaped figure near the piano. "Flora, can you show yourself?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure seemed to waver, then disappeared entirely. Emily's excitement was tempered by a growing sense of unease. She decided to move on to the next haunted location, room 217, where the ghost of Elizabeth Wilson, a former maid, was said to reside. Guests often reported their belongings being mysteriously unpacked, or their beds being made while they were out. Emily stood outside room 217, her hand hesitating on the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, she entered. The room felt different from the rest of the hotel, warmer, almost welcoming. She set up her digital voice recorder and began to speak. "Elizabeth Wilson, are you here? Can you give me a sign?" She waited, the silence pressing in on her. Then she felt a sudden rush of cold air, and the recorder in her hand felt like ice. She played back the recording, her heart pounding. Amidst the static, a faint voice whispered, "Welcome." Emily's hands shook. She decided to leave room 217 and head to the infamous underground tunnels that connected the hotel's various buildings. These tunnels were said to be a hotbed of paranormal activity, with sightings of shadowy figures and disembodied voices. The entrance to the tunnels was hidden behind a door in the basement. Emily descended the creaking stairs, each step echoing ominously. The basement was dark, lit only by the dim beam of her flashlight. She found the door and pushed it open, revealing a narrow passageway shrouded in darkness. She stepped into the tunnel, her flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The air was damp and musty, and the temperature seemed to drop with each step. she heard a faint whispering, indistinguishable words carried on an unseen breeze. Her EMF detector beeped erratically, and she felt a chill run down her spine. Suddenly, she saw a figure at the end of the tunnel, a tall, shadowy silhouette, standing perfectly still. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She raised her flashlight, but the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. She hurriedly made her way back to the main part of the hotel, her heart racing. Determined to gather more evidence, Emily decided to spend the night in her room with her equipment running. She set up her camera to record and lay in bed, trying to ignore the sense of foreboding that had settled over her. Around midnight, she awoke to the sound of soft footsteps in her room. She lay still, listening. The footsteps grew louder, approaching her bed. She opened her eyes, and there, standing at the foot of her bed, was a woman in an old-fashioned maid's uniform. Her face was pale and expressionless, her eyes dark voids. "Elizabeth," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. The woman didn't respond. She simply stood there, staring at Emily with those hollow eyes. Emily reached for her camera, but as she did, the figure vanished into thin air. The room was deathly silent once more. The next morning, Emily reviewed the footage from her camera. To her shock, she saw the figure of the maid standing at her bedside, just as she had seen her. But as she watched the footage, something even more disturbing caught her eye. Behind the maid, a dark, shadowy figure loomed, almost invisible against the darkness of the room. It seemed to be watching both Emily and the maid. Emily's excitement turned to dread. She realized that the haunting of the Stanley Hotel was far more complex and sinister than she had imagined. The ghost of Elizabeth Wilson was not alone. Something darker and more malevolent was present. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily decided to visit the hotel's archives. She hoped to find records or accounts that might explain the presence of the dark figure. The hotel's librarian, Mrs. Hawthorne, was a stern but knowledgeable woman who had worked there for decades. She led Emily to a dusty room filled with old documents and photographs. "Be careful what you seek," Mrs. Hawthorne warned. "Some stories are best left untold." Emily nodded, undeterred. She spent hours poring over the records, finding accounts of various hauntings, but nothing about the shadowy figure. Frustrated, she was about to give up when she found an old journal hidden among the papers. It belonged to Flora Stanley herself. The journal detailed the construction of the hotel and the strange occurrences that plagued it even then. One entry caught Emily's attention. "We have disturbed something ancient, something that should never have been awakened." The workers found a strange artifact buried deep in the ground, a small obsidian idol covered in cryptic symbols. Since its discovery, shadows have moved on their own, and an oppressive darkness hangs over the hotel. "I fear we have brought a curse upon this place." Emily's blood ran cold. The dark figure was not a ghost, but an ancient entity, awakened by the disturbance of its resting place. She realized that the figure had been watching her, drawn to her curiosity and determination. That night, Emily decided to confront the entity. She returned to the underground tunnels, carrying Flora Stanley's journal and a small flashlight. As she entered the tunnel, she felt a familiar chill. The shadows seemed to close in around her, and she heard the faint whispering again. "Show yourself," she demanded, her voice echoing in the darkness. "I know you're here." The temperature dropped sharply, and the shadowy figure appeared at the end of the tunnel. This time, it did not vanish. It moved towards her, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. Emily stood her ground, clutching the journal. "I know what you are," she said, her voice steady. and I know why you're here." The figure stopped, mere feet away from her. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a deep, guttural voice filled the tunnel. "You have awakened me," it said, "and now you must pay the price." Emily felt a surge of fear but forced herself to stay calm. "I can help you," she said. "Tell me what you want." The figure seemed to waver, then spoke again. "Return the idol to its resting place. Only then will I be at peace." Emily nodded, understanding the weight of her task. She hurried back to the hotel, knowing that her time was running out. She found Mrs. Hawthorne and explained everything, showing her the journal. Mrs. Hawthorne's face paled. "I remember the idol," she said. "It's in the hotel's basement, hidden away. We must act quickly." Together, they retrieved the idol, a small black statue that radiated a palpable sense of evil. They returned to the tunnels, the air growing colder with each step. Emily placed the idol on the ground and began to chant the words from Flora Stanley's journal. The shadows around them seemed to recede, and the oppressive darkness lifted. The figure appeared one last time, its eyes filled with a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. "Thank you," it whispered, before dissolving into the air. The tunnels fell silent, and the chill dissipated. Emily and Mrs. Hawthorne returned to the hotel, exhausted but victorious. The hauntings gradually ceased, and the Stanley Hotel returned to its former grandeur, free from the curse that had plagued it for so long. Emily's experience became a legend in its own right, a tale of bravery and the unknown. She had ventured into the darkness and emerged, not unscathed, but wiser and more aware of the delicate balance between our world and the mysteries that lie just beyond the veil.